I reversed what was considered incurable decline in a 55-year-old man tethered to an oxygen tank who's been battling type 2 diabetes for decades, but recently diagnosed with type 1 as well, and weighed down by hidden mycotoxin exposure, which all of his doctors completely missed. And in just 12 weeks, his oxygen dependence dropped from 24/7 to intermittent, his walking distance quadrupled, without oxygen this time, his HbA1c improved while decreasing his amount of insulin, and toxin load was dramatically reduced. This is Robert's story. Robert is 55. He was once an engineer, but his rapidly declining health led to him becoming disabled. And by the time he found us, his life revolved around oxygen tanks, 3 different inhalers, 4 insulin injections per day, and frequent hospital visits for respiratory tract infections. And the hardest part wasn't just the breathlessness or blood sugar swings, it was the slow erosion of his identity and independence. Robert has 2 primary care doctors and 2 specialists, including a cardiologist and pulmonologist, and yet not one had any answers for him. Doctors told him to accept the decline and just wanted to focus on managing symptoms and monitoring the further decline. But Robert refused, and rightfully so. In his own words, "I keep telling these doctors they must be missing something because my health has been declining so fast in just the past few years." And as it turns out, Robert was absolutely correct, and what he was dealing with was far more than just late-stage COPD. And in this case study, I'm going to show you exactly what everybody else missed. The problem was that Robert's biology had collapsed on multiple fronts. He was facing end-stage COPD, and he explained that he often felt like he was suffocating. This can be very scary for anybody who's dealt with it before. And his cognition has declined a lot, with him sometimes not able to finish a sentence. He described that sometimes when he was even texting, that he would forget what he was going to say before he could finish typing the sentence. He has diabetic-associated neuropathy, so both his hands and his feet would often go numb and tingly. And he's now dependent on insulin due to his recent type 1 diabetes diagnosis, and his HbA1c is 8%, with his daily highs reaching around 188. This is very uncontrolled diabetes. It's terrible. He has lower leg edema, which is typical of heart failure, although his heart was completely fine, and I'll explain more about this in just a moment, so stick with me here. And he was using escalating inhalers, steroids, insulin, and oxygen 24/7, but no restoration strategy, just getting worse. He wasn't just sick, he was literally stuck. Process. We didn't try to patch symptoms. We rebuilt Robert's system with an intensive health restoration protocol powered by BioRecode System, biological mapping and recode framework. I reviewed his EKG, his echocardiogram with Doppler on his right-sided heart and left-sided heart, as well as the MRI on his lungs. Now, what was particularly interesting in his case on the right-sided heart was that everything looked completely normal. And normally with heart failure, it starts on the right side before progressing to the left side. The fact that he had lower leg edema suggests that he might be dealing with heart failure. But even when looking at his right ventricular systolic pressure, it was not high. If it was high, that would indicate that he has pulmonary hypertension. But it was completely normal. And his left-sided heart, nothing was enlarged, and his left ventricular ejection fraction was 62%, which is pretty good by all measures. So we ordered more comprehensive blood work, including screening for some suspected autoimmune diseases. I just wanted to broadly check if he had any type of autoimmune disease, as well as flag for just a couple particular ones which I had on my mind. So I tested him for ANA, which if it was positive, it would have indicated that he most likely has at least one of them. But it's not conclusive in any particular autoimmune disease either. It's more of a broad screening strategy. Regardless, this did come back as negative. We took a comprehensive history and implemented 24-hour biomarker analysis, including SpO2, which is blood oxygen levels. And since Robert's an engineer, and I also am a former electronic engineer, I had an interesting conversation. I was talking to him about how I actually used to design these types of devices which could measure blood oxygen levels, these wearables. And so he really enjoyed that as well. It was awesome. But I got him this ring, which could check SpO2 constantly. It had a screen on it, which gave a readout 24/7. And this was important because if his blood oxygen level dropped low at any given point in time, he needs to stop what he's doing and actually sit down so that he can recover that. Even though he was on oxygen 24/7, it's not enough to keep his SpO2 from dropping at all times. And the evidence of this was his blood work. I saw that he had hyperkalemia, which is high potassium in the blood. And what happens during hypoxic conditions or lack of oxygen in other words, is that your red blood cells release their intracellular stores of potassium and leak it into plasma. And this is why he had hyperkalemia. But the key findings were that both left and right-sided heart were in great condition. There were no signs of pulmonary hypertension. Late-stage COPD and diabetes was all we saw so far. No autoimmune findings. So I did have a follow-up call with him, and I questioned if there could be any mold in his environment. So I just asked him questions about his home. And he did tell me that he is absolutely positive he's been exposed to mold because apparently it's all throughout his basement. And he just never told anyone because he didn't think it was actually a big deal. I had to explain to him that we have had clients in the past who developed autoimmune diseases, including type 1 diabetes from mycotoxin exposure, and that the literature itself has strong associations between mold and type 1 diabetes, as well as zonulin and type 1 diabetes. You see, mycotoxin exposure increases something called zonulin, which makes the intestinal barrier more leaky. This means that some things can get absorbed into the bloodstream from the gut that shouldn't be. But also, zonulin affects the blood-brain barrier. It can make it more leaky as well. So now you're getting things into the brain that you really shouldn't be, and this can cause cognitive deficits in some people, as well as even personality changes or anxiety and depression. And this may be why Robert was suffering from poor cognition, although the chronically elevated glucose levels certainly wasn't doing him any favors there either. So we implemented precision peptides, supplements, and medication adjustments. Comprehensive lung peptides as well as immunomodulatory peptides are absolutely essential here because even the fact that he has diabetes means that he has a suppressed immune system. And the peptides we used will be beneficial for not only boosting immune function, but also they show great benefits in terms of any autoimmune condition. We implemented both short-term peptides, which can be extremely useful in the mycotoxin detox as well, and then also some prolonged courses of different types of peptides, which are safe to take long-term. We implemented mitochondrial-enhancing peptides, which not only improve heart function and muscle function, but will improve insulin sensitivity and help drive down his chronically elevated glucose levels. Pancreatic and metabolic peptides were important in his case because on his MRI, he had some pancreatic calcifications, which is a little abnormal, but not necessarily completely, because as you age, you do develop morphological changes to the pancreas. Although the calcifications are a little bit more on the abnormal spectrum, it was just reinforcing the need to implement pancreatic peptides in this case, especially because he also has diabetes. We wanted to support detoxification and antioxidant status, so using peptides such as glutathione, the body's master antioxidant peptide, and also a strong and potent detoxifier, was essential in this case. Now, regarding the supplements, we wanted to shift his body into utilizing glucose over fatty acid oxidation because you can create more ATP. The mitochondria can produce more ATP with glucose than they can with fatty acids, and this requires the same amount of oxygen. So in order to match the amount of ATP that you would get from glucose, you need to use much more oxygen if you're using fatty acid oxidation. Now, there's a great supplement which can help the body prioritize glucose use, and it's called meldonium. However, there is a more beneficial supplement that can be used, which is often prescribed for angina outside of the United States. And it's very rare. You probably never heard of it in the United States, but it's called trimetazine. It's a very good medication for this purpose. And it will also have some pro-longevity benefits as well as reducing inflammation. We also wanted to implement some supplements to improve diabetic neuropathy. So these are just typical over-the-counter ones you can get on Amazon, including some micronutrients. And micronutrients that were lowered as a result of long-term high-dose metformin use were important to restore because, you see, metformin can paradoxically lead to a worsening of diabetes over time if it's used at max doses or for a period of years. And this is because it depletes the body of a specific micronutrient, which you need to supplement in if you're taking metformin. Otherwise, you're asking for problems. Unfortunately, not many people know about this. We implemented a mucolytic to reduce mucus in the lungs. And when it came to medication adjustments, we wanted to improve microcirculation so that the capillaries in the lungs could uptake oxygen better to the bloodstream, and to lower leukotriene synthesis because this will reduce inflammatory cytokines, especially in the lungs, which will help to protect against a furthering of the fibrotic processes going on in COPD. We needed to do a complete overhaul to his blood pressure meds. This is because he was taking an ACE inhibitor, which was at a quite high dose, by the way. And this can lead to less breakdown of bradykinin, which can accumulate in the lungs and stimulate coughing. So if you've ever heard of somebody having cough as a side effect of a blood pressure medication, it's probably because they're on an ACE inhibitor, which is not great for COPD. But also, he was on a beta blocker, but a too high of a dose of both of these, and it was actually causing these episodes of low blood pressure or hypotension. And I actually had to have him drink coffee on a couple occasions to get that blood pressure up. And I had to do a complete overhaul of his blood pressure meds and took care of all those issues for him. And ultimately, we did get him off of loop diuretics, which was furosemide, otherwise known as Lasix, that's the brand name, but not immediately. He needed this medication to reduce the edema, which was accumulating in his lower legs. And we did get him off of it at the end of his program, which just goes to show how effective this program actually was. Precision nutrition and metabolic reset. So we wanted to focus on protein-rich, anti-inflammatory foods, and we wanted to cut back on carbohydrates and sugars. So we actually gave him some recipes to help replace the sweet options, including ice cream, which was one of his favorite foods, which is terrible in his condition, with healthy options, including a homemade ice cream, which he can make, which not only tastes good, but is much healthier and very low sugar, and it won't cause as many problems for his very poorly managed diabetes. The results before was that he needed continuous oxygen. His fasting glucose was 180, HbA1c 8%, insulin levels he had to escalate the dose on over the past year. And he would get these recurring infections, which would often require hospitalization with intravenous antibiotics and steroid injections. And his mycotoxins were high. So ochratoxin, this is a member of the Aspergillus family, which is a common type of mold in people's homes. And he was above the 95th percentile for this mycotoxin, so very bad. After 12 weeks, he was able to do a 6-minute walk in which he reached about 200 meters. And he did this without oxygen, whereas before he was requiring oxygen at all times. And so his oxygen use has decreased somewhat, and he only needs it on physical exertion, but again, he didn't use it for this particular test. His fasting glucose come down to 120, HbA1c 6.5, which means he's still a diabetic, but it's really good, especially considering the fact that we were able to reduce his insulin amount by 20% while achieving these results. So things are really moving in the right direction versus before where they were going in the wrong direction. He had no infections during the course of this program. Mycotoxins come down very low, almost undetectable levels, completely safe zone. And his functional status improved. He's able to run independent errands, do his hobbies. He was able to work on his mother's vehicle, which is something he wouldn't have been able to do for many years. He's going for outdoor walks and taking care of his mother. Here's what Robert said. I am now able to take care of my mother much better, who needs increasing amounts of care. I didn't think I'd ever have the opportunity to do that with how fast I was declining, and the doctors were out of options. You proved them wrong. This matters because if you have COPD, your lungs get very stiff from fibrosis, which sometimes makes taking a breath feel like oxygen isn't entering the lungs, because your lungs can't expand as well with a breath when they're stiff, nor can they contract as much when you exhale. And this results in some carbon dioxide remaining trapped in your lungs, and this is what results in the suffocating feeling that some people describe who have COPD. And it can be very scary for these types of people. And the mainstream medical system offers little support for those with COPD, unfortunately. But you must identify the cause, whether it's environmental toxins, autoimmune, genetics, smoking. And it's never just genetics alone, by the way. Like, you may be predisposed to COPD, but there's definitely another driving cause of it. And treatment should aim at fixing the root cause, reversing the fibrosis, as well as the inflammation that drives that, and improving gas exchange. And you can regenerate the lung tissue to a certain extent, but it's something that the mainstream just doesn't know how to do. And this is exactly what our biological recode system was built for. Urgent, complex cases where decline feels inevitable, but yet restoration is still possible. And you can begin your own recovery. If you or a loved one has COPD, please share this video with them. You can go to cuttingedgelongevity.com/transformation and we will build you a program. But if you just care about optimizing your basic health and longevity and you don't have like a bleeding neck health problem, and like in the case of Robert, then we also build more simple programs specifically geared towards that process with my 12 pillars of cutting-edge longevity and anti-aging. So that's another service you can get on the site. And if you are a self-learner, you prefer to just learn on your own, then we also have a course that you can take for that at an even lower price. So this has been Brendan Henry, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.